This is Under the Cover, where we take you behind the scenes of some of the most iconic photo shoots, music videos, and fashion shows of our time. I'm Kylie Cavaco-Reck, and alongside my father, legendary stylist Paul Cavaco, we'll dive into the glamorous styles and the ingenious collaborations that shaped modern fashion. We'll talk to supermodels, designers, hairdressers, makeup artists, and even a few other stylists to hear their personal stories. Because there's always a story. Under the Cover. It has been said that Linda Wells invented beauty journalism. This is Linda Wells. Hi, Linda.
Hi, Kylie. Hello, Paul Cavaco.
Hello, Linda Wells. Boss.
Yeah, exactly.
It's true.
We're very formal with each other.
Well, you have lots of names for each other.
We do.
We do.
Including and not limited to, you were office married for 16 and a half years.
We were indeed.
Longer than a lot of marriages last. Let's tell it that way.
It's so true. It's so true.
Very successful marriage.
It was a very successful marriage and we had a lot of fun. I have to say it was my favorite job to date. I had such a good time.
Oh, it was my favorite too with you.
Yeah,
seriously.
That's how I felt too. I lasted so long because I never lasted anywhere that long. It was like, okay, I'm done here. But you were a great boss. I have to say, you were a great leader and a great boss, and it made working there so much fun.
Well, we had a ton of laughs, and you were the most fantastic person. And we also got in good fights, too.
We did.
Starting with the first time we met.
I was about to say, so as with all good relationships, they always have a good beginning. So will you share with us the first time you met?
Well, Paul, you might remember this. You might remember this better than I do. But I remember when you were at KCD and I thought, oh, what a great idea. I'll ask KCD if they'd like to represent us in terms of publicity. And we were just starting this magazine. I'm not even sure the magazine was out yet. Everything was pre.
No, wasn't out. And that was, but I went to see you. I went to your office and I don't even think your real office even. I don't think did you have real offices then?
I feel like we were at 360 Madison, so it might have been our real office, but it was, it was all a little janky, let's face it. It was a little, for Condé Nast standards, we were just starting very scrappily.
Right.
And
so, we left out the fact that it was Allure magazine.
At this point,
yes.
at this point,
that little detail.
Right.
What year is this then? 91?
90 or 91.
90 or 91.
Yeah, because
probably
it started in 91 March, so it might have been a little bit before that.
It was just before. Yeah, because you didn't even have an issue that I could see.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with that said, then in 91 or 90, right? It's probably 90. How old are you both?
I was 31.
So you were at the time one of the youngest editors-in-chiefs at Condé Nast.
Yes, but now other people have carried that sash and that crown, and I'm happy to relinquish it. But yes, I was 31.
31. But you weren't just 31, as the editor-in-chief of a magazine. You were 31 starting a magazine, which is a little bit different. So, my understanding is that, in fact, maybe your first issue, we're on podcast, so I'm in episode land, issue was, maybe had some bumps. Will you share with us some of those bumps?
Sure.
Oh, sure.
Well, besides the fact that Paul Cavaco and my first meeting was actually a precursor and a sort of prophetic moment, because Paul thought this is insanity. This magazine that's going to be critical of the beauty industry and of products, because that we were starting as a journalistic magazine about beauty, and that was not common then. It's not common now, but it was really not common then because nobody criticized anybody who was an advertiser. So there was always this really cozy relationship between advertising and editorial, and we wanted to break that. And that was really at the encouragement of Cy Newhouse, who owned Condé Nast, and Alex Lieberman, who was the editorial director. So Paul saw that and thought, you're insane. This magazine is going to go up in flames within seconds. And it almost did, as a matter of fact. So we started it in March 91. And it didn't look like a beauty magazine or what people expected a beauty magazine to look like. It was scrappy. It was messy. It was, not on glamorous, white, thick paper. It was kind of on a very cheap stock, and it was ripped, and it had overlapping copy on the photographs, and all these things that were really breaking every rule and were really kind of sacrilege. So
A bit like
we
a
started,
scrapbook, yeah?
yeah, it
And the
did. It looked like a
format
scrapbook.
Was not a traditional size either, correct?
Yeah, it was oversized, and we thought that was great until we realized that we couldn't fit into the newsstand slots. I mean, all this feels like, back in the days when people were, making fire and sleeping in caves, but there were newsstands and there were newsstand slots, and these newsstand slots were a certain size, and they were not this, they were the size for people. They were not the size for
As in
a large
People
magazine,
not human beings.
Yeah, human beings. Thank you. I was speaking shorthand. So they were also oversized, which meant that advertisers had to readjust their ads to be in Allure. So guess what? Nobody wanted to do that. And so besides the fact that we were, aggressive and people didn't think that it looked like a beauty magazine, so by the first issue, we were robust. By July, we had 7 pages of ads. So that's like nothing. And so we had a rough start. Definitely had a rough start.
Except I think the thing is the fact that you did it with a bigger format brought a lot of attention to it.
That's true.
The fact that it wasn't treated the same way beauty was treated in fashion magazines brought attention to it. So there was I think the choices were wise. I think that you just had to tweak them, obviously, which is what you did. But it did look like nothing else. And you wanted to read it because of that. And it looked sort of tabloidy in a really strange way.
It did. That was deliberate.
Was it?
Yeah.
And
so it felt like news, like it felt like ripped from the headlines.
It felt urgent.
Urgent.
Would it be fair to say that your background at the New York Times was influencing this idea of the urgency or the news piece of it?
I definitely influenced the whole point of view of the magazine and the MO of the magazine. It really did. That was really what was behind it. But we had an earlier version. We had a prototype that we did that was very traditional looking and very dreary and just completely awful. And and it was shredded. There were about 40,000 copies printed, and they were going to go out to advertisers to let them know what the magazine would look like. And we all thought, okay, Alex Lieberman and I were like, well, and then when it actually was printed, we realized that it was hideous and horrible and boring and had no personality at all. And so we scrapped it, and that gave us sort of the freedom in a strange way, even though I felt the bullets whizzing by my ears. I thought I was going to be fired, and probably should have been. But that gave us the sort of inspiration and the kind of freedom in a way to just break the mold completely. And that's what the magazine did. And so even though it took a moment to catch on, it got a lot of attention. I mean, some people in the industry, and particularly in the advertising industry, said it was the ugliest launch magazine they'd ever seen. And I took that as a badge of honor. I thought, good, I don't want it to be pretty, because it's about beauty. And if it's boring and pretty and austere and looks like the kind of thing you'd pick up at a salon that was done for hairdressers, it's not going to excite people. So it had an energy that was unexpected, and it broke a lot of rules. And then, so then it actually ended up doing really well. By about the September issue, things started just going up, and it was a success. But, and we won awards, and we got, everything was going terrifically then. And then when I first met Paul, if I can fast forward it to that moment, Paul was at Vogue, and Paul and I met in a dark bar on the Upper East Side. I think it was a restaurant. It was called Donovan's. It's still there.
Yeah,
Donovan's.
It's a restaurant bar.
Yeah,
it's like a bar and grill or something.
Yes, like a really old-fashioned bar and grill.
My understanding is that
Madison
the condition
Avenue
of this meeting was that you could smoke Paul.
That
at
was
this
the
meeting.
condition.
And I should call you
That was.
Dad when I say that. Dad, I hear that you had, the condition was smoking at the meeting.
Yeah. That was,
that was condition number one. The condition number two was we could not be seen by anybody because you were not allowed to do this at Condé Nast. You were not allowed to approach people who worked at other magazines. It was poaching. There was like all kinds of HR rules about it. In fact, all these rules were always broken, but it was a sort of, there was a kind of outward respect for the rules, even though everybody dodged them. So Paul and I had to meet on the Upper East Side where nobody was because it was so uncool. It was on Lexington, Paul, even less cool, and in a place where he could smoke, which is exactly what we did. And then we cooked up this scheme about how he was going to come to Allure. Polly Mellon was there. I mean, and I should preface that by saying the great Polly Mellon was there. She was extraordinary, and frankly, when Polly joined Allure, which was early in our life in 91, it changed everything for us in terms of how we were accepted by the fashion world and accepted by people like Gianni Versace, who used to send me faxes of encouragement. But it was because of Polly's stature and accomplishments in the industry that Allure got on the map, and we got seats at fashion shows. Before that, I was either in standing or I was in row G. And who even knew there was a row G? But there was a row G, and I was in it, often alone, but there I was.
But there you were.
But then, you know, how do you top Polly Mellon? Well, you don't, but you bring in Paul Cavacco, who is a totally different person, but in many ways carrying that same torch of quality and, you know, a knowledge about fashion and an ability to kind of get on your hands and knees and do the work and also have a vision about the whole magazine. So Paul had this genius thing that he said to me, and it was like, why didn't I think of that? And Paul said, you know, why don't you make it beautiful? And it was sort of like a light went off in my head that I'd been fighting it for so long because I felt like we needed to stand on a different platform and be different and sort of not be sort of visions of loveliness is what Alex Lieberman called it. Yeah, Paul, go.
But it was also the start of the magazine. Right after you did the magazine, grunge happened.
That's right. And we embraced it.
And you embraced it. And as it was petering out, you had editors that were still embracing it, which to me, you know, one of the first things I said to Linda is, you have a beauty magazine where none of the girls look beautiful. They look like they haven't put a brush through their hair in years. And the two of us were like, oh, okay, let's make a beautiful magazine.
Well,
but still, because it still had, the thing is, journalistically, it always was a great magazine. But the photos were no longer matching.
Yeah. I think we were fighting. It was sort of the dust protest test too much. It's like the Shakespearean thing where I think we were fighting something and the battle was already not worth, it didn't make sense. It was like we had a chip on our shoulder about, you know, being a beauty magazine. Let's get rid of the chip. Let's embrace it. And that was one of the great things that you brought to it, Paul, was like, let's show beauty. And so every shoot that we did, the hair and makeup changed with each photograph, which is a lot of work.
But it also was because we could credit then, we were allowed to credit a different color lipstick, a different color eyeshadow. So it allowed for different hair products. So it actually, for the first time, there was a lot of change. Which was for the
listener, so they understand what this means, because what you're talking about is credits related to advertisers. Yes. So when you changed the looks for each photograph, it allowed for now an abundance of advertising, because within one story, if you have 6 pages, you have 6 eye looks or 6 opportunities for eyeshadow, 6 opportunities for mascara, 6 opportunities for lipstick. And that allowed for a broader range of advertisers to come into play and get editorial coverage, not just advertising coverage.
It sounds kind of crass maybe and unrealistic if we're a journalist magazine and we're giving credits to advertisers. But the way it worked was when you go to a shoot, as Paul knows, and you know, Kylie, the makeup artists will use a little bit of this and a little bit of that. They've got everything pulled out of the packaging, and they've got all the bullets of makeup smashed into a case. And then they take a brush, and there's no way to trace back what lipstick they used, because it would be like trying to get a forensic expert to sort of figure that out. So what we would do is look at the color, decide who we were going to give that credit to for that lipstick, and then ask the advertiser to match it. And then we'd make sure that it was matched when we did the color correction and everything, so that it was
this is very
actually
behind
more
the scenes.
useful. I know, it was actually more useful to the reader. Maybe it sounds like I'm sort of justifying it, but it was more useful to the reader because they could actually buy the product that we said was on the page, on the model.
Well, do you remember when that moment happened with Monica Lewinsky when she was interviewed and everyone wanted to know her lip color?
Yes.
You know, I think that having that as a reference point for, you know, the real true match, as opposed to like, oh, you take a little of this and you take a little of that and you have this alchemy. Nobody can really do that. That's an artist.
No one.
And so I do think actually, ultimately, while feels maybe intellectually dishonest, it actually is serving the reader, which I think
that was our justification. Yeah.
And I think that that's, if you're doing a great magazine, you're serving the reader. That's the job of the magazine, is to serve the reader and to tell a story.
Yeah.
And I think when you talk about this tension between wanting to be beautiful or wanting to be reporting, truly and honestly, it needs to be both. They want it to be beautiful, but they also really do need to know the truth, the skinny on the product. You know, that was something that Allure always did a great job of, is kind of giving you the true, you know, understanding of the product or the procedure or whatever was, you know, did it work? Did it not work? And you always had the bottom line to understand sort of, okay, this is maybe worth my money or my time. And I feel like at this point, when you've started, is celebrity in the mix yet? Or are we still in model land?
No, it's starting.
Model.
We're models with some celebrity. Because you had already started to do celebrity, because you had done Angelina very, very early in her career, Angelina Jolie. And
that was a story. Oh my gosh.
Will you tell us
remember
the story?
that? Yeah,
no, because I wasn't there yet.
You weren't there.
This is your
I can
first
tell you the story.
Angelina cover.
Yeah. So we just started doing celebrities, and that switch kind of in the mid 90s, I think, or early 90s. Paul, you'll remember better. I don't remember time.
No, it's mid 90s.
So Angelina Jolie was in that movie Girl Interrupted, and she was amazing, and we wanted to do her. And, you know, I'm a prophet. I'm kidding. I got a lot of duds, believe me, but she was not one of them. And so Polly Mellon would always have a conversation with the celebrity before the shoot, and we were going to shoot Angelina for a cover, and Polly has this conversation, and she marches into my office. Well, I've never been spoken so rudely in my life, in my entire career. No one has spoken to me like that. And I'm like, okay, what happened? And so Polly does her thing, which is very effusive. Angelina, the body, the lips, the skin. You know, she's from the Deanna Vreeland school of expression and over the topness. And Angelina's like, cut the shit, Polly. And Polly's like, what? And then Angelina says, I am not going to be photographed on a beach in a pink dress with pretty hair and makeup. I want to be wearing black. This was the days where she was wearing the blood around her in a vial around her neck. So I want to be wearing black, and I want to be in a studio, and I want to be. And Polly's like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And I was just like, courage, you know, what are you going to do? Off you go. And so Polly goes to the shoot, and she comes back, and Angelina Jolie is on a beach wearing a long pink dress. I think it was Armani, and then beautiful hair makeup. So between the conversation,
an advertiser at that.
Yeah, no less. Between the initial conversation and the shoot, I don't know how they figured it out, but I was not there to witness it, but that was a moment. So yes, we started putting, and it sold like crazy, P.S., but we started putting celebrities on the cover.
Girl Interrupted was 1999.
Well, there you go.
And who was your first cover?
I think it was Sharon Stone was our
first
celebrity cover. And that was a story too, because we sent a stylist and a photographer to go shoot Sharon Stone. And we had a sample of a John Galliano dress from his early collection. It was the chinoiserie collection, and it was that beautiful embroidery and everyone can remember that dress that Nicole Kidman wore to the Oscars when she was with Tom Cruise, and it was that incredible kind of chartreuse dress with the embroidery. So we show up with this dress. The stylist shows up with this dress, and they're in a hotel room, and Angelina's about to put the dress on. Now, I wasn't there, but this is what I got. Sharon Stone, sorry, thank you, was about to put the dress on, and she said, "Oh, you know my rule, don't you?" And the stylist is like, "What's that?" And she said, "I wear it, I keep it." So the stylist calls me and he goes, "What do I do?" And I said, well, that's not our dress. We can't give her that dress. That's a sample, a one-of-a-kind sample that belongs to John Galliano, who at the time was doing this very, it was a really hands-on kind of process. He didn't have a lot of money. We don't have this dress to give away. So I said to the stylist, "Put her in a robe." And he put her in the hotel robe, and she looked beautiful. But I don't even know. I think that the cover might have been I don't know what the cover was. It doesn't matter. It was
I wear it,
hilarious.
I keep it, and you get to keep your robe.
Yeah. So we gave her the robe, and we paid for the robe. And she looked beautiful, P.S. So she was our first cover. But then when Paul was there, we really went almost all.
We went all
celebrity.
in. We did our first cover together was because it was a
Winona Ryder.
Was Winona
Ryder? Yeah.
And what had happened was your first cover of Allure was Stephanie Seymour, and it was
that's the first ever cover of Allure.
First ever cover of Allure when the
very first issue.
First issue comes out, and it's close. It's cropping her eye and right under her nose, and maybe you see a little bit of her top lip. But I might even show you saw that much.
And her hand was up, I think.
You don't see her lip at all, actually. You see her eyes that are blue, 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 blue. And you see the sky behind her. Yeah. And you have the cover lines in this bright, gorgeous blue. And then Allure is in a shocking pink.
You can tell it's we didn't do a ton of retouching because look at her eyebrows. They're so bushy and not right at all. I mean, granted, it was a time of full eyebrows.
They're very modern. Now that's like, they're fabulous.
I think that initially when people saw that first cover, it was like, oh, this is new, this is different. And it's about beauty because there was nothing else. There was no fashion in it.
Yeah, we wanted to crop it really closely back then. Yeah.
And then little by little, because when I looked at all the covers for, of all of Allure during your tenure, it was the first year was actually cropped fairly closely. And then little by little, you moved back. And I think people wanted the fashion advertising so they started.
Who knows? Or, I think ultimately photographers are used to shooting fashion and stylists want to show fashion. So I think that it was partly that as well. Probably. That whole desire to, have it be a fashion shoot, everything, because that's the orientation of the stylist.
And they probably wanted to have the makeup in context with the clothes, It gave you something to go with because it wasn't just randomly putting makeup on.
But then when you start together.
You and I talked about it. And it was like, let's go back to close up. Not as close as the first cover, but we came very close. So the first cover, Winona, is truly a headshot. Like full onto face onto the camera, really right there in your face. And, fortunately, she's gorgeous.
I would say she's gorgeous and very symmetrical. So she can take that really head-on moment.
And so
was not an easy thing to do really with celebrities because, it's not that they're not hired because they're symmetrical or perfect or whatever, but they're incredible looking, but it's a really tough thing to stand up to that kind of photography. And I think one of the things we figured out was you can't put a lot of foundation on a face and powder and make the skin perfect and then shoot it because it looks incredibly cakey and old fashioned. So we had done this story where we had a picture of, was it Joan Crawford, Paul? You remember it. We weren't at Allure, but it was
this was my favorite thing you ever did at Allure. Among the things, because it was Joan Crawford.
Pre-retouching.
And then retouched.
I think it was by Steichen or something like that. But it was a photograph of her with these freckles all over her face. And you would never have known that Joan Crawford had freckles because you never saw her that way. And then the after picture, was it Joan? Yeah. The after picture was, it was all done in retouching. And it was pre-computer retouching. People think, oh, there wasn't retouching back in the day. Well, yes, there was, but it was done by hand. So we showed that as an example of how the power of retouching and the way that these photographs existed and changed. And that became the inspiration for all those covers that you did, particularly with Michael Thompson, where you didn't put on a ton of foundation and then you would correct it in retouching. Our retouching bills were rather extraordinary. But
can you tell us a little bit when you say retouching? Because I think there is, people are going to hear this and go, excuse me. Now,
yeah, I know, liars, and we're journalists, but we're retouching the pictures. But I know.
I think that there is a part of retouching that you were doing that was actually trying to be more true to the skin quality and tone and trying to just, so ultimately what ended up happening is they had more of their real skin. And then the blemishes that would have been covered up anyway with makeup just were removed via retouching rather than foundation.
Well, I think the thing is, which this is going to get a little technical, but when someone is lit and they're lit sort of to the side, the naked eye does not see the imperfections, but the camera will pick up the imperfections. So what in the retouching, what we did is we cleaned up, like you said, the blemishes and the imperfections that normally you would never see if you were just looking at the person. So the person, in fact, as you said, ended up looking like they really looked because you could see, because we didn't do the base on them, we didn't do foundation. You saw the skin quality. And that was always the thing you would ask me for is, I want to see the skin. I want to feel the person. And, so that was, that was our objective because Linda wanted it to be that. She wanted to show what people look like.
You actually could see the pores. I mean, that's what I loved. It's like you can actually see the pores that had that real quality, which you wouldn't have done if you just put on foundation or washed out with retouching. So it was a very kind of artful retouching.
Even. I mean, so it was trying to be as true as possible. And I think what people forget is that, the eye, much like a camera, is just a lens. But a camera lens is much stronger than our ability to perceive with our eye, which is what you're talking about, Dad. And so you were also trying to catch that balance, I think, of how does someone really look in real life, where you do see pores, where you do see slight imperfections, and not to just, take an eraser to the texture of the skin. And so that's also what's really beautiful when you look at the older Allure covers is that you do see texture in the skin. You do see, there's some of the covers actually, which I thought was sort of beautiful, is like you do see the little fine lines under the eye that are...
Yeah, that was deliberate.
Which is
we tried
beautiful.
Not to get rid of that.
We left it in because we would be like, if you saw it, you would know that it was retouched.
Right.
If you saw it all gone. Also, the person then became a painting, really not a photograph anymore.
I mean, I think you see that a lot.
I think that's what was happening in all the other magazines because they were really retouching it because they wanted it perfect. So it's like if the clothes were wrinkled, they, they got rid of the wrinkles. If the face had a wrinkle, they got rid of the wrinkle. So we got rid of things that were... You're saying other magazines in general. So it was the overall practice was retouching across the board. And it sounds like what you all were working to try to do is to have as much realism as you could when also you need to be on the newsstands, as Linda described before, next to all these other magazines that if someone's often on this cover, sometimes you have people on the cover at the same time of multiple magazines. How do you handle that, by the way? What happens when you have people on the cover at the same time? That didn't
happen that often. It happened so rarely. We negotiated it so we didn't happen. But
what do
I
you
think
do
that
to have that happen? To have you not have...
It's the deal.
You negotiate it. It's the deal in advance.
It's an exclusive.
Well,
so how did
it's just you have it for that month. Yeah.
How did you all... Because you got some major celebrities over a lot of other magazines. Do you think it's
because
you...
people early. That was exactly our real thing, was to do people early. Just to go back to retouching, I think that was back at that time, it was a new tool. And so people were like any new tool, computer retouching kind of gave you this freedom, and people overused it. And so it was just kind of learning how to use the new tool. But then in terms of getting celebrities, our thing was to get them early. And so we had this page in the front of the magazine called Allure's Face. And a lot of the Allure's Faces, Angelina was one at a time. They were people on the cusp of fame, and they were kind of pre-fame, and they were people who had promise. And they sometimes made a very quick jump from an Allure's Face to a cover. And one example was Taylor Swift. We shot her as an Allure's Face, and Kelly Adderton, who was our West Coast editor, reminded me of this recently. And one of the things we wanted to do was, she had very ringlety hair at the time. It was kind of country ringlety. And we wanted to change her hair because we're a beauty magazine. That was kind of the thing we did. We'd kind of change somebody's look and make them look a little bit more fashion. So she agreed to it, a little reluctantly, but she agreed to it. And she was young. I don't know. Was she 16? Was she 17?
No, she was, because when she did the cover itself, she was 17. So she was 16 when she did Allure's Face.
So she came up to Kelly after the shoot. She said, listen, I agreed to do the hair. I recognize that was important to you. Now I have a request, and I would like to have a cover. And Kelly called the model, the booker, the celebrity booker at the time, Maggie Buckley, and said she just asked for a cover. And Maggie was like, well, her album has just gone through the roof. And Maggie called me, and I said, book it, definitely get her. So that's how we got Taylor way before anybody else. And there were many examples of that. Britney Spears. Paul and I were crazy about Britney Spears, and we saw Hit Me Baby One More Time. And it was like, we have to get this girl for a cover. And the suits at Condé Nast, they were really against this. They were like, we cannot, this is a teeny boppery girl, and we can't do this. And, she's Disney and all that. And I'm like, I am telling you, this girl is going to be huge. Now, I wasn't always right. Let me just assure you.
You were pretty right.
I had lots of mistakes, but then again, you live and learn. But that's the beauty of 12 issues a year. You can make a couple mistakes, and it's not all perfect. We did Rihanna way before. So we did Britney, and that was a huge hit. Tall and I went to the MTV Awards. It was the one with the snake and the ripping off the tuxedo. And we looked at each other like, okay, we called it. That was good, because the issue wasn't out yet, and it was just right before that, and it was like, oh my God, how fantastic! So it was Britney, it was Rihanna.
That's such good luck when that happens. When you
oh my God, it was great. It was Beyonce.
We had Beyonce. We had the Olsen twins.
Yes,
when they turned 18, and dressed them in Galliano, dressed them in fashion, and not as like a joke little twins.
This is pre-Row. The row. So
Wave 3.
You identified them as fashion people.
Fashion people. Yeah.
And it's so like crazy, but
Yeah, so like crazy.
And one of the things was Condé Nast didn't love more than one person on the cover. They said it wouldn't sell. And we got these, and we had to do heads. So to get two big heads on the cover.
It was an architectural challenge.
It was an architecture. It was.
They looked like a two-headed,
Because they were melted together, the bodies.
Yeah, it was great though. Yeah. But so there were all those moments, but I think a lot of it was that we did people early, and that was kind of a feather. We thought it was a feather in our cap, and it was also a way for these people to then get the attention of the cosmetics industry, to maybe get a contract, which worked out well for a lot of people, and then to move on to other magazines as they went along in their career. So it was sort of like we were like a test case in some ways.
Yeah, because we did a lot of people early that later, Britney, like 6 months later, became a Vogue cover. We did Gwen Stefani, who had only done teen magazines, even though she wasn't a teenager, but she was a musician, so it was only teen magazines. We did her. She got a Vogue cover right away. So
Kim Kardashian.
Same thing. Yeah.
Way ahead.
Way ahead. Before anyone really did her as a fashion cover, we did her.
And Paul styled her to look sort of like Ava Gardner, and it was beautiful.
She never looked good. She told me that so we did the shoot. I ran into her at like the CFDA or something, not the CFDA, somewhere else. Maybe the CFDA, but some other event. We ran into her, and she said to me that And I want to say it was Spielberg, but I'm not sure. So I don't know. But it was some director who she knew. When he saw the cover, sent her all of Ava Gardner's movies.
Oh, beautiful.
Because he thought she
gosh.
looked so much like her in her Allure cover.
That was a beautiful cover. Why not? Yeah, it was a beautiful cover.
I love you. Let's just let the journalist says,
Cecil B.
let's
DeMille.
not worry about facts.
It was Cecil B. DeMille, exactly.
So when we think about the covers, we think about these, the evolution of the cover. One of the things that I noticed in looking back at the covers is the cover lines really have a nice sort of arc here. I shan't.
I'm going to cringe to death because it was always like, lose 5 pounds by tomorrow. And I apologize to the world for that. I just really have to apologize to the world.
But I actually...
They were brilliant, some of the cover lines. I mean, but really funny.
I think that what people...
A Tempest in a D Cup.
Oh, that was good.
Who was the Tempest in a D Cup?
So we had shot Jessica Simpson, known for her
bosom.
And it was all about, things that were going on with her at that moment, so it was a little tempestuous. And the cover line was,
Tempest in a D Cup.
Which was hilarious and fabulous. There were a lot of them like that.
I think what I'm more thinking about is that the cover line is very akin to almost like what now is in marketing campaign, like email marketing campaigns. They were the thing that kind of got you to open the magazine. They were the thing that said open me up. Let me see what's inside. It's a tease.
It's a tease.
And who's writing these cover lines? Is this the writers?
I did it. I had a team of people, I had 4 people, and we'd all write them on our own, and then we'd get together and talk them out and battle it out and everything. So it was a very weird and laborious process because it really did matter.
It does matter,
it was sort of like we all went into our corners and played around, and then we just kept tinkering and tinkering.
It's fascinating because some of them are really interesting to me to look back how early this was happening. Like in September 1991, you have 75 biggest beauty lies plus the truth about sensitive skin food cravings. That is so early to be talking about that. We're still having a conversation to this day in 2023 about what we're eating and how it's affecting our skin and all of this sort of, debunking the myths around beauty. And so this was, arguably we could say, I think someone else has said it, not me. So I'm not taking the credit for this, but that 3 decades ago, Linda Wells created beauty journalism. That's what you're credited with.
That's a nice thing to say.
That's
a nice thing to say. I think, it's sort of like it's a shallow pool and a low bar. I mean, I hate to say it because I don't mean to be rude, but at the same time, there just wasn't this. And it wasn't that it was, some kind of major achievement. I think it was just something that these two things had never been uttered in the same sentence. And, I say journalism with a low J, with a lowercase J. I wasn't like,
journalism with a lowercase J.
But, then sometimes I have to say we did do really strong investigative stories. We did story about formaldehyde in hair products, and that subject is coming up again. Yeah. And we discovered and we found samples that all those keratin hair straighteners and Brazilian hair straighteners actually released formaldehyde when the heat was applied. And so there were a lot of things that were very groundbreaking. And so that was really exciting. But I think that there just wasn't the kind of reporting attached to beauty. And now there is. So that's a really happy thing. And I think that some of the people who have taken this concept came from Allure, and they all went to different magazines, and they're all over the place. And it makes me really happy that that they're carrying that torch.
I think you can argue that the first person who does something, even if it seems like, oh yeah, that was obvious, but no one had done it before. So
Right.
I hear what you're saying, but I wouldn't discredit it so much because it's, the first time you hear a sound of a musician, you're not like, well, that was obvious that we should have gone there, Beatles. Do you know what I mean? It was like,
right.
I think
Yeah.
there's big things that happen because they're an obvious thing to be doing, but no one really knows how to execute it. And
or it's not obvious to everybody.
It's not obvious
to the one person or two people or something.
But
it's obvious
and
to
I
you.
think that our timing was really, really fortuitous. It was a time when the world became interested in something that was very much not discussed and it was really kind of a footnote in the fashion world. So, beauty was secondary to fashion, which is partly why maybe we were doing fashion covers for a period there, because fashion got all the attention and it got all the love. And now it's really flipped, and beauty is where all the investment is, all the excitement is. It's really an interesting twist. And
it's the reason I don't have a fashion store and have a beauty store.
Yeah. Exactly. And, and I think beauty has been a place where people have been able to express themselves, and it's so individualistic and it's right on your face. But it also was a time when Botox became something that people used in their faces, and retinol. And there were a lot of innovations that happened when we were, first coming up in the world. And that was a terrific thing for us editorially.
Would you say that you are an editor or a journalist?
I'm a writer and an editor, and I've always been both of those things. And it was funny because even when I was at the Times, it was sort of like they said to me, well, you kind of have to choose. Are you an editor or a writer? And I was like, don't make me choose. So
Both
I was a
loves.
food editor and I was a writer about beauty. And I'm more, I write now a lot more than I ever have for Airmail. And Airmail Look, the magazine I started, the digital magazine I started for Airmail. And it was, so I don't really, I do report and I like reporting. I think that the word journalism, though, is reserved for people who are really much more hardcore than I am. And I don't really feel justified in using that term for myself.
I think that one of the things that is the most repeated about you is what a fabulous writer you are and how engaging you are. It's so true. And
well, you always got, because there was always an editor letter in all the magazines.
Exactly. So,
and your editor letter every year, people would, there wasn't an official voting on it, but it always was, the best editor letters are always Linda Wells.
Well,
Because
that's nice to say, but I think that
beautiful.
The problem with editors' letters, too, was this was another situation where it was kind of a low bar because people use the editors' letters to be a kind of verbose table of contents. And I just thought, you've got a table of contents. What do you need this editor's letter to repeat what's in the issue? It's not like this enormous tome that you can't get through by just looking at it. So I decided to just write the editor's letter about something entirely unrelated. And it was an essay. So, a very short essay, but it was an essay. And so it tortured me, but I've kind of found writing's gotten easier with practice. It's funny how, when I did it just once a month, other than just rewriting things that I had to rewrite at the time, it's gotten that muscle's gotten a little bit stronger. So that's nice.
Do you have an editor's letter with Airmail Look?
No, but I write essays and I write reported essays. So, I have a story in every issue that's the first story, but it's really a reported essay. And then I do a column for Airmail, regular Airmail, big Airmail, we call it. And that's twice a month. Sorry, twice a month.
So twice a month in big Airmail. And then Look comes out how often?
Once a month.
It has a
first Friday of every month.
Oh, I know, but thank you for telling us. I love when Airmail comes out. It is just
good.
I think what's cool about it is you're reporting, like in Allure, you're reporting about what is happening now. What are people interested in right now? And because it's online, you're not having to wait 3 months or whatever to publish it.
Right. The long wait time.
That long lead, does change the reporting in this day and age. I'm sure in 1991 it didn't, but how long from the first moment when you sort of finish a magazine till the time it comes out, what is that lead time usually?
In a print magazine?
When you were doing Allure, yes.
3 months, pretty much. 2 or 3 months.
So
And,
as an example,
this is like, sometimes it depends on when I write it, but it might be a week for Airmail or Airmail Look. And I feel like that's become agonizing. Like, I feel like I write something like I wrote about noses and big noses. And because it was the time of Maestro with Bradley Cooper playing Leonard Bernstein, and Barbra Streisand's book came out. And then there's, of course, timely Rudolph. And, it was right before Christmas. And so I wrote about people loving their noses and sort of big noses and strong noses. And it was torture waiting for that to come out because I thought I'm going to be scooped. And I think somebody else did it, but I don't think I was scooped, but I could be wrong. So it was it's like, to me, it's like, I want to make sure I get there on time. That's a big source of pride.
That feels like a journalist thing to want to get the scoop. That feels like,
yeah, it is.
I feel like you have editor very strong. You have journalist quite strong with a capital J. And, and I feel like this writer, were you always a writer?
Yeah, that was my first love.
I
didn't know how to edit until my first job was at Vogue, and I learned how to edit from watching other editors do their work. And I would look at it while I walked it from my office to another office and see what they cut and moved around. And then that's how I learned how to edit.
What was your job at Vogue?
Coffee maker, Xerox machine fixer. I was an assistant in the beauty department is where I started. And then, it's a very much a training, and it's a little bit of you've got to get knocked down a lot in order to move your way up, which was really good for me. And so I learned a lot from all the people who were there, and then kind of rose up slightly in the ranks. And I was there for 5 years. And I guess I finished by being an editor and a writer. And I can't remember what my title was, like associate editor or something like that.
In the beauty department.
Yeah. Yeah. And I did wellness and beauty. Yeah.
Wellness and
beauty. And the only reason I got in the beauty department was because they had an opening, and I just didn't think I was going to get it anywhere else. So I grabbed what I could because it was hard to get those jobs. And I thought, well, it's not what I want to do, but I'll figure it out. And then I realized that it's fascinating, that it's, beauty is, to me, such a great subject and so inherent and connected to emotions. And, it's filled with tension and people feeling not good enough. And all those things make it a very vital and important subject. So I continue to love writing and exploring beauty.
What year were you the beauty assistant coffee maker at Vogue
I was in 1980.
Okay. So in 1980, you were the health and wellness beauty. Those two are put together in 1980. So I think what's fascinating is that everyone now in 2023 thinks that like, oh gosh, it's so great. We're putting health and wellness together and fitness. And that was happening in Allure.
It was happening. No, it was happening at Vogue.
And it was happening at Vogue even before then. So
totally. And that was not my idea. I don't know. Maybe that was Alex Lieberman's idea, but it was great to be able to bring those things together.
Yeah. That was, I think, when we talk about the reader and giving the reader information and what they need, it was putting those together helped the reader to understand that these things go hand in hand, that there's a fusion between them. Because that wasn't happening certainly at the dermatologist's office, or it wasn't happening when you went to, the trainer. But in fact, it was all interrelated. And a lot of that is because of the type of reporting that began at Vogue and actually that you really teased out in Allure.
Yeah. Yeah. That was it was a really great moment to bring those things together. I mean, I went to the first gym that had one-on-one training. Those things didn't exist for non-athletes. So that opened, it was called Sports Training Institute, and I would go there once a week and hobble back. But, it was just that whole exercise culture was a different world. And then it was diet culture, which was not very evolved, let's just say.
Mm-hmm.
But, we learned as we went. We worked with what we had.
We're always learning. I like to say we're either winning or we're learning. So
Good. And as long as we're not losing.
Well, I feel like in the process of the loss, you learn something new.
There you go.
And you learn the tool to win. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, I love being with you both, Paul and Kylie. I feel like it's family.
I know. I miss you so much.
I miss you guys. I can't believe it. We're not together, but here we are. We had this moment.
I'd like to just, this will be bonus content, but I'd like to just say that for two people that were married for 16 and a half years, you both have a lot of children in the fashion industry.
That's right.
I'm not even a Linda Wells' stepchild. I feel like we need to fix that at 47.
That family tree. That family tree is big.
Tree.
We have a lot of children. And it's so funny because I think of them as my daughters. For the most part, they were women, and I think of them as my daughters.
That's what I'm saying. Daughters. And I did not get and you're my work moniker.
Daughter. But you know what, Kylie, how many times have I interviewed you for stories for Airmail? I mean, it's funny because every time it's like, here we go again. I got to ask Kylie. And it's not always about knockout beauty. It's about a lot of other things.
I do feel like you ask me, though, I think because sometimes we, in the world of fashion and beauty and all these things, there's a very much a you can't sit with us vibe.
Oh, yeah. You're not invited to the party.
Pardon? You're not invited to the party.
You're not invited to the party. And then if you're invited to the party, you're not invited to the after party or whatever, there's always
right.
this hierarchy. And it's like, you're going to be told exactly who you are and how you stand how they see you, which is never what you wanted to be. It's never enough, And I that was one of the things I had to get over really quickly was like, don't worry about that because it's never, you're never going to be the most exalted. Fine.
Never. But what's interesting, though, is that after a long time in something, you do become an insider, whether you want to be or not. You ultimately are an insider when you've spent many years together and you've spent, I always say I could have probably had a very different career if my parents had done different things. But in fact, I went to fashion shows and photo shoots and,
you weren't, and your dad wasn't a steel worker. Too bad.
My dad wasn't a steel worker, but
too bad, exactly.
I liked a union suit, and I would have been happy like
that.
And
you could have styled that.
But I do think that this time period that you all spent together during what arguably was the heyday of fashion and beauty, is informing what's happening today. It's informing what you're still writing about. It's informing what we're still talking about, which is kind of fascinating.
I mean, everything does. Nothing exists in a vacuum. And when I was sitting at fashion shows with Polly Mellon, it was always Yves Saint Laurent did it first. And, there's always this. There's always history. And I think it's really important to know what happened before so that you could be a more responsible reporter, writer, editor in the current moment. So I like the fact that I've had all these decades of experience, and I like the fact that I can still write about it. I'm not dead yet.
Well, thank you for being a part of our history.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Oh, God. We adore you and love you.
Love you guys, and I really feel so lucky to have you in my life and also to have done this and had this time with you guys.
Under the Cover is a production of Knockout Beauty Media Group and Audley. I'm writer and host Kylie Cavaco-Reck. Guest booking is by Paul Cavaco and Lindsay Hannon. Audio and video production is by David Wojcik. Photo research is by Kate Hill. Our executive producers are Kylie Cavaco-Reck and Paul Cavaco at Knockout Beauty Media Group, and Matthew Wells, Lindsay Hannon, and David Wojcik at Audley. Special thanks to Meredith Honig, Jessica Alpert, and John Parati at Rococo Punch, and Rachna Shah, Jamie Karp, and Jenna Preventure at KCD. For photos and more details on the series, follow Under the Cover Podcast on Instagram and Substack at Under the Cover. If you like the series, please leave us a review, and as always, don't forget to tell a friend. I'm Kylie Cavaco-Reck. Thank you for listening.